The morning sun cast long shadows across Sierra Vista, Arizona. As Florence Jones stood on the east bank of the San Pedro River, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild stallion. The rushing waters, swollen from 3 days of relentless spring rains, carved a treacherous path between her and the life she desperately sought to build. Clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders, she took a hesitant step back. The memory of her parents drowning in this very river 10 years ago freezing her in place. Florence was 22, an age when most women in 1873 were already married with children, but she had spent her youth caring for her ailing grandmother in Boston until the elderly woman's passing 2 months prior. Now, with nothing but a letter of employment from Mrs. Henderson, who needed a schoolteacher on the west side of Sierra Vista, Florence had traveled nearly 2,000 miles only to be stopped by this final, terrifying obstacle. "You ain't thinking of fording that, are you, miss?" a deep voice called from behind. Florence spun around, nearly losing her footing on the muddy bank. A tall man sat atop a chestnut quarter horse, his broad shoulders outlined against the morning sky. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that seemed to assess both her and the river with equal expertise. I need to reach the Henderson ranch," she stammered, her voice barely audible above the rushing water. "I'm the new schoolteacher." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse closer. "Madam, that crossing's dangerous for experienced riders in the best conditions. After these rains," he shook his head, "it'd be a death wish." Florence felt tears of frustration sting her eyes. "But I'm expected today. I've come all the way from Boston." "The name's Jack Eastwood," he said, removing his hat and revealing warm brown eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners. "Most folks call me Jack. I work the Double E Ranch just north of here." "Florence Jones," she replied, attempting to maintain some composure despite her predicament. Jack gazed across the churning waters, his expression thoughtful. "The Henderson place is my neighbor. Good folks." He turned back to her. "There's a crossing point about 5 miles north, but even that'll be washed out now." "Then, what am I to do?" Florence asked, hating the quiver in her voice. Jack's eyes traveled from the river to her face, then down to her trunk sitting forlornly beside her. His expression shifted, determination replacing contemplation. "You wait right here, Miss Jones," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "I've got some men and materials at my ranch. This river's been needing a proper bridge for years anyway." Florence blinked in surprise. "A bridge?" "But that would take 3 days, maybe 4 with this weather," he interrupted. "Not ideal, but it's faster than waiting for the water to recede, which could be weeks with the mountain snow melting." "Mr. Eastwood, I couldn't possibly impose Jack," he corrected with a slight smile. "And it's no imposition. The whole valley would benefit from a crossing that don't wash away every spring." He mounted his horse again. "There's a small cabin about 100 yards back through those trees. It's not much, but it's dry. You can wait there while I gather what we need." Before Florence could protest further, Jack tipped his hat. "I'll be back before sundown with supplies and my ranch hands. We'll make your path safe, Miss Jones. You have my word." With that, he turned his horse and galloped away, leaving Florence staring after him in bewilderment. No one in Boston had ever offered such immediate, practical help to a perfect stranger. Perhaps the West wasn't quite as wild as she'd been led to believe. The cabin Jack had mentioned was indeed small, just a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. But it was solid and dry, and Florence was grateful for the shelter as she settled in to wait, unpacking only what she needed for the night. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, she sat by the cabin's single window, watching the river's relentless flow with trepidation. The water that had claimed her parents now stood between her and her future, and she couldn't help but wonder if coming west had been a terrible mistake. True to his word, Jack returned as the sun began to set, leading a wagon loaded with lumber and tools. 3 other men rode alongside him, their faces weathered by sun and wind but their expressions curious and not unkind as they nodded greetings to Florence. "Miss Jones," Jack called, dismounting. "This here's my foreman Thomas and 2 of my best hands, Miguel and Caleb. They're the finest bridge builders this side of the Mississippi, though they don't know it yet." The men chuckled, tipping their hats to Florence. "Mr. Eastwood has informed us of your situation, miss," Thomas said. "We'll have you across that river in no time." "You're all very kind," Florence replied, feeling overwhelmed by their willingness to help. "But I don't understand why you would go to such lengths for someone you don't even know." Jack's expression softened. "Out here, we look after each other, Miss Jones. It's how we survive." He glanced at the river. "Besides, I've been meaning to build a proper crossing here for years. You've just given us the push we needed." As the men began unloading supplies, Jack approached Florence with a small bundle. "Some provisions from the ranch cook. Figured you might be hungry." Florence accepted the package, finding fresh bread, cheese, and dried beef inside. The simple kindness brought a lump to her throat. "Thank you, truly." "We'll camp here tonight and start at first light," Jack said. "If you need anything, just holler." That night, as Florence lay on the narrow bed listening to the distant murmur of the men's voices around their campfire, she felt a strange mix of anxiety and hope. The river still roared outside, an ever-present reminder of her fears, but for the first time since arriving in Arizona territory, she felt less alone. At dawn, Florence woke to the sounds of activity outside. Through the window, she saw Jack directing his men as they measured and marked lumber. After quickly dressing and pinning her auburn hair into a practical bun, she emerged from the cabin. "Morning, Miss Jones," Jack called. "Hope we didn't wake you too early." "Not at all," she replied. "Is there something I can do to help?" Jack smiled, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made Florence's heart skip unexpectedly. "Can you cook?" "Of course," she answered, slightly indignant. "Then you'd be saving us from Thomas's awful coffee," he said with a wink. Man can wrangle cattle and build just about anything, but his coffee could strip paint. The foreman grumbled good-naturedly as the others laughed. Florence found herself smiling as she set to work at the small fire pit they had built. As she prepared coffee and a simple breakfast from the supplies they had brought, she observed Jack's easy authority with his men. He worked alongside them, not above them, and there was a mutual respect that impressed her. By mid-morning, the men had established a plan. They would construct a simple but sturdy bridge using the natural rock formations on either side as anchors. Jack spent much of that first day in the water, despite the chill, surveying the riverbed to determine the best placement for the supports. Florence insisted on helping where she could, preparing meals and even assisting with measuring lumber once the initial framework was established. By sunset, the foundation posts were secured on both sides of the river, an impressive start. "You're making remarkable progress," Florence said as they gathered around the fire that evening. "Jack's been planning this bridge in his head for years," Thomas revealed. "Ever since the Montgomery boy was swept away trying to cross during the spring floods 3 years back." Florence glanced at Jack, who was staring into the flames. "I didn't know. He was 14, Jack said quietly. "His family's farm is on the other side. He was bringing medicine for his sick mother." He looked up, meeting Florence's gaze. "The river takes too much from us." It's time we tamed it a little." In that moment, Florence understood that this bridge wasn't just for her. It was Jack's way of preventing future tragedies, of making the community safer. Her admiration for this taciturn cowboy deepened. The second day brought challenges. The river's current remained strong, making it difficult to secure the central supports. Florence watched anxiously as Jack and Miguel worked waist-deep in the rushing water, fighting to position heavy timber beams. At one point, Jack lost his footing and disappeared beneath the surface. Florence gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. For 3 terrible seconds, there was no sign of him. Then he emerged several yards downstream, sputtering but holding tight to a rope his men had thrown. As they pulled him to shore, Florence rushed forward with blankets. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice shaking. Jack grinned through chattering teeth. "Takes more than a little water to stop a double-E cowboy, Miss Jones." Despite his bravado, Florence insisted he rest and warm up before continuing. To her surprise, he acquiesced, allowing her to wrap him in blankets by the fire while his clothes dried. "You mentioned you're from Boston," Jack said as she handed him a cup of hot coffee. "What brought you all the way out here?" Florence settled on a log across from him. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died crossing a river much like this one." She glanced toward the water. "She passed away 2 months ago. I saw Mrs. Henderson's advertisement for a teacher and thought, perhaps a new beginning was what I needed." "Must have been hard, leaving everything you knew." "There wasn't much left to leave," Florence admitted. "My grandmother was my only family, and Boston held too many memories." Jack studied her, his expression thoughtful. "You're brave, coming all this way alone." Florence laughed softly. "Not brave enough to cross that river. Fear isn't the absence of courage, Miss Jones. It's having the sense to recognize danger." His eyes held hers. "A person who doesn't fear at all is just foolish." "Is that why you're building this bridge? Because you fear the river?" "I respect it," he corrected. "And I've seen enough death. If this bridge saves even one life, it's worth every splinter and soaking." That afternoon, once Jack had recovered, the work continued with renewed determination. By nightfall, the central structure was taking shape, a skeletal walkway stretching halfway across the churning waters. On the morning of the 3rd day, Florence awoke with a strange feeling of anticipation. Outside, the men were already at work, their voices carrying over the sound of hammers and saws. She dressed quickly and stepped out to find the bridge now spanning 3/4 of the river's width. "We'll finish today," Jack announced as she approached with coffee. "Miguel's riding to the Henderson place to let them know you'll be arriving tomorrow." "I don't know how to thank you all," Florence said, overwhelmed by their dedication. Jack's smile was warm. "Seeing you safely across will be thanks enough." As the day progressed, Florence found herself watching Jack more than the bridge. There was something compelling about the way he moved, confident yet careful, his hands strong and sure as they worked the wood. Several times, she caught him looking back at her, and the intensity in his gaze sent warmth spreading through her despite the cool spring air. By late afternoon, the final planks were being secured on the far side. The bridge was simple but solid, wide enough for a wagon to cross and sturdy enough to withstand the river's current. Florence stood on the east bank, marveling at what these men had accomplished in just 3 days. "Would you like to be the first to cross?" Jack asked, appearing beside her. Florence felt her chest tighten with anxiety. "I am not sure I can." Jack's expression softened with understanding. "Your parents," she nodded, unable to speak past the sudden lump in her throat. "May I ask what happened?" Florence took a deep breath. "We were traveling to visit my mother's sister. There was a flash flood, the wagon." She swallowed hard. "I was 8. A stranger pulled me from the water, but my parents were already gone." Jack was quiet for a moment, then gently he took her hand. "The bridge is solid, Florence, I promise you. But if you're not ready, there's no shame in that." The warmth of his calloused hand around hers gave her strength. "No, I should face this. I've come too far to turn back now." Jack nodded, keeping hold of her hand. "We'll go together, one step at a time." As they approached the bridge, Florence's heart hammered in her chest. The rushing water below seemed to call to her with menacing whispers of past tragedy. Her feet felt leaden, unwilling to take that first step. "Look at me," Jack said softly. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "Not the water, just me. I won't let anything happen to you." Drawing a shaky breath, Florence placed her foot on the first plank. It held firm beneath her weight. Another step, then another. Jack walked beside her, his hand steady around hers, his presence a silent reassurance. Halfway across, a sudden gust of wind rocked the bridge slightly. Florence gasped, freezing in place, her eyes darting to the churning waters below. "Florence," Jack's voice drew her attention back. "I built this bridge to make your path safe, and I meant it." His eyes held a promise that went beyond their current crossing. "Trust me." Something in his gaze anchored her, calming the storm of fear inside. She nodded and continued forward, step by step, until suddenly they were standing on the western bank of the San Pedro River. "You did it," Jack said, pride evident in his voice. Florence looked back at the bridge, then at the man beside her. "No, Mr. Eastwood, we did it." That evening, they celebrated with a simple but joyous meal around the campfire. Thomas produced a fiddle from the wagon, and soon the night was filled with music and laughter. Florence found herself swept into a lively dance by Jack, their movements awkward at first but quickly finding harmony. "You're full of surprises, Miss Jones," Jack said as they caught their breath after the dance. "I wouldn't have taken you for such a sprightly dancer." "My grandmother insisted on proper instruction," Florence replied, smiling. "Though I doubt my dancing master would approve of this particular setting." "I think it's perfect," Jack said softly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. In that moment, with the bridge silhouetted against the star-filled sky and the sound of the river now a gentle backdrop rather than a roaring threat, Florence felt something shift inside her. This wild, beautiful land was working its way into her heart, as was the man who had built a bridge just to help her cross. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Florence packed her belongings, a strange reluctance slowing her movements. In just 4 days, these men, especially Jack, had become important to her in ways she hadn't expected. A wagon approached from the west, crossing the new bridge with ease. A middle-aged couple waved enthusiastically as they drew near. "Miss Jones," the woman called. "I'm Helen Henderson. We were so worried when you didn't arrive. But then Miguel told us what happened and about this magnificent bridge." Florence greeted the Hendersons warmly, introducing them to Jack and his men. As they loaded her trunk into the Henderson wagon, she found herself seeking Jack out, wanting a moment alone before they parted. She found him checking the bridge's moorings one last time. "Mr. Eastwood, Jack," she corrected herself. "I wanted to thank you properly before I leave." He straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "No need for thanks. It was the right thing to do. Nevertheless, I am grateful, not just for the bridge, but for helping me face my fear." She hesitated, then added, "The Henderson place is just 5 miles from your ranch," Miguel mentioned. A smile tugged at the corner of Jack's mouth. "That it is. Perhaps you might call sometime. I would enjoy showing you how your bridge has changed my life." Jack's eyes brightened. "I'd like that very much, Florence." As she turned to leave, he caught her hand. "The spring social is next Saturday in town. Would you consider accompanying me?" Florence felt a flutter of happiness in her chest. "I would be delighted." The Hendersons' ranch was everything Florence had hoped for: a spacious main house with a separate small cottage for her, and a converted barn that would serve as the schoolhouse for the dozen or so children from surrounding farms. Helen Henderson was warm and welcoming, showing Florence around and introducing her to the ranch hands and their families. "That Jack Eastwood is quite a man," Helen commented as they prepared dinner that evening. "Building a bridge just like that." "He said it was something he'd been planning for some time," Florence replied, trying to keep her tone casual. Helen gave her a knowing look. "Perhaps, but I've never seen him move so quickly on it before. Thomas told my husband it was all because of you." Florence felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure he would have done the same for anyone in need." "Maybe so," Helen agreed with a smile. "But he's coming to dinner tomorrow, and I don't think that's something he does for just anyone." True to Helen's word, Jack arrived the following evening, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his usual vest. He brought a small bouquet of wildflowers that he presented to Florence with an almost boyish shyness that charmed her completely. Dinner was a lively affair, with Robert Henderson regaling them with stories of the early days of Sierra Vista. Florence found herself seated beside Jack, acutely aware of his presence throughout the meal. "How are you settling in?" he asked as they stepped onto the porch after dinner, the night air cool and fragrant with sage. "Well, I think," Florence replied. "The children start lessons on Monday. I'm nervous but excited." "They'll love you," Jack said with quiet confidence. "You have a way of making people feel at ease." Florence smiled. "That's kind of you to say, though I'm not sure my stern grandmother would agree with that assessment." "Tell me more about her," Jack invited, leaning against the porch railing. As they talked, Florence found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone about her grandmother's rigid expectations, about the loneliness of her childhood after losing her parents, about her dreams of creating a different kind of life for herself out west. Jack listened intently, occasionally offering glimpses of his own past growing up on a struggling farm in Missouri, coming west at 17 to make his fortune, working cattle drives before saving enough to buy his ranch 6 years ago. "It's not the biggest spread," he admitted, "but it's mine, free and clear. Every acre paid for with honest work." "That's something to be proud of," Florence said earnestly. Jack's eyes met hers. "I always thought so. But lately, I've been thinking a man needs more than just land to make a real home." The implication in his words sent a pleasant shiver through Florence. Before she could respond, Robert Henderson called Jack inside to discuss a matter concerning the cattle market, leaving Florence to ponder the unexpected direction her life had taken since arriving in Arizona territory. The following days passed in a blur of activity as Florence prepared for her first day of teaching. She arranged the schoolroom, organized lessons, and memorized the names of all her future students from the list Helen had provided. Jack visited twice during that time, once bringing lumber to help Robert repair a sagging shelf in the schoolroom, and again on Sunday to escort Florence and the Hendersons to church services in town. Each time, Florence found herself more drawn to his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. Her first week of teaching proved challenging but rewarding. The children ranged from 5 to 14 years of age, with varying levels of previous education. Some could barely write their names, while others read at an advanced level. Florence adapted quickly, developing different lessons for different ability groups. On Friday afternoon, as the children were leaving, she spotted Jack's chestnut horse tied outside. He was waiting at a respectful distance, hat in hands, watching as she bid farewell to her students. "Mr. Eastwood," she greeted him, suddenly conscious of her wind-blown hair and ink-stained fingers. "What brings you here?" I wanted to see how your first week went, he said, his expression warm, and to make sure you hadn't forgotten about the social tomorrow. I haven't forgotten, she assured him, pleasure warming her voice. Good. I'll come for you around 4 if that suits. As he mounted his horse to leave, he paused. Florence, you look happy. Teaching suits you. His simple observation stayed with her long after he'd ridden away. He was right, she was happy, happier than she'd been in years. And it wasn't just the teaching that had brought this contentment. The spring social was held in the community hall in Sierra Vista, a simple wooden building transformed by lanterns and wildflower arrangements. Women in their best dresses and men in clean shirts filled the space, greeting Florence warmly as Jack introduced her around. Everyone's been curious about the new schoolteacher, Jack explained as they moved through the crowd. Especially after the story of the bridge got around. Florence groaned. Is that what I'll be known for? The woman too afraid to cross a river? Jack's expression grew serious. No, you'll be known as the woman who faced her fears and crossed anyway. There's courage in that, Florence. The music started and Jack led her onto the dance floor. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer for such a tall man, guiding her through the steps with confident ease. Where did you learn to dance like this? Florence asked as they twirled. A shadow crossed Jack's face. My wife taught me before she died. Florence faltered in her steps. I didn't know you were married, 6 years ago for just under a year. His voice was soft with old grief. Her name was Sarah. Fever took her and our unborn child. I'm so sorry, Florence said, her heart aching for his loss. It was a long time ago, Jack replied. I didn't think I'd ever want to dance again or feel. He trailed off, his eyes holding hers meaningfully. They danced in silence for a moment, the shared understanding of loss creating a deeper connection between them. Later, as they stepped outside for air, Jack took her hand. Florence, I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel Jack Eastwood. A sharp female voice interrupted. A woman in an elaborate burgundy dress approached, her expression tight with displeasure. I've been looking everywhere for you. Jack's face closed off. Beatrice. I didn't realize you'd be here. Clearly, the woman replied, her gaze sliding dismissively over Florence before returning to Jack. Your absence from my dinner party last week was noted by everyone. I expected better. I apologize if you were counting on my attendance, Jack said stiffly. I had other commitments. Beatrice's laugh held no humor. Yes, I've heard all about your bridge building heroics for the new schoolteacher. She looked at Florence again, this time with barely concealed disdain. How charming. Florence felt Jack tense beside her. Miss Florence Jones, may I introduce Miss Beatrice Collins, daughter of Samuel Collins, who owns the bank in town. Florence nodded politely. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Collins. I'm sure it is, Beatrice replied coldly. Jack, my father was hoping to discuss the loan for your northern expansion. He's inside. Jack's jaw tightened. Please tell your father I'll speak with him next week at the bank. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. This is a perfect opportunity next week, Jack repeated firmly. If you'll excuse us. He guided Florence away, his expression stormy. Once they were out of earshot, he sighed. I apologize for that. There's no need, Florence assured him, though her mind was racing with questions. She seems very interested in you. Jack ran a hand through his hair. Beatrice has been trying to secure a match between us for over a year. Her father controls most of the lending in the county, and she knows I need a loan to expand my herd. I see, Florence said quietly, trying to ignore the twist of disappointment in her chest. She's very beautiful. Jack stopped walking and turned to face her. Florence, there is nothing between Beatrice and me, nor will there ever be, loan or no loan. The certainty in his voice eased her concern. No, he confirmed, his expression softening. My interest lies elsewhere." Before he could elaborate, they were interrupted by Robert Henderson calling Jack over to settle a friendly wager about cattle breeds. The moment passed, but the warmth in Jack's eyes when he looked at her remained, kindling a hope that Florence hardly dared acknowledge. As spring deepened into summer, Florence settled into life in Sierra Vista. Her school flourished, with 3 more students joining as word spread of her patient teaching methods. She became a regular visitor at the Double E Ranch, often riding over with Robert Henderson on his weekly visits to discuss cattle business with Jack. On one such visit in early July, Florence found herself alone with Jack as Robert conferred with Thomas about a shared grazing arrangement. They walked along the creek that bordered Jack's property, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. "I've been meaning to show you something," Jack said, leading her toward a small rise. "It's just over this hill." As they crested the rise, Florence gasped. Below them stretched a meadow filled with wildflowers, purples, yellows, and reds, creating a natural tapestry against the green grass. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's my favorite spot on the ranch," Jack admitted. "I come here to think sometimes." They settled on a flat rock overlooking the meadow. Jack seemed unusually pensive, twisting his hat in his hands. "Florence, there's something I need to tell you," he began. "That sounds serious," she said, trying to keep her tone light despite the sudden flutter of anxiety in her stomach. "I've been offered a chance to buy the adjacent property to the north," he explained. "It would double the size of my ranch, give me access to better water rights, and allow me to increase my herd significantly." "Jack, that's wonderful," Florence exclaimed. "Isn't that what you've been working toward?" He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "It is, but Samuel Collins is still the only banker willing to lend me the money I need," understanding dawned. "And Beatrice Collins comes with her father's favor." "She's made that increasingly clear," Jack confirmed grimly. "Her father invited me to dinner next week to discuss terms. I haven't given him an answer yet." Florence's heart sank, but she forced herself to respond rationally. "It's a significant opportunity for your future. You should consider it carefully." Jack looked at her intently. "My future isn't just about cattle and land, Florence." He took her hand, his touch sending warmth spreading up her arm. "These past months getting to know you, it's changed what I want from life." Florence's breath caught. "What are you saying, Jack?" "I'm saying I'd rather have a small ranch and a chance at real happiness than all the land in Arizona with the wrong woman." His eyes held hers steadily. "I'm saying I've fallen in love with you, Florence Jones." Joy surged through her, bright and overwhelming. "Jack," a shout from the direction of the ranch house interrupted her confession. They turned to see Thomas running toward them, waving urgently. "Fire," he called. "In town." They raced back to the ranch, where Robert was already mounting his horse. "The general store's ablaze," he explained tersely. "Could spread to the whole town if not contained." "Florence, stay here with Helen," Robert instructed as they prepared to ride for town. "No," she protested. "I can help. I've dealt with fires before." Jack looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "Stay close to me." The ride to Sierra Vista was tense and fast. As they approached, they could see smoke billowing above the buildings. The general store was fully engulfed, and townspeople were forming a bucket brigade from the town well. Florence joined the women organizing supplies for the injured, while Jack and Robert joined the men fighting the flames. For hours they worked, passing buckets and tending to those overcome by smoke. By nightfall, they had contained the fire to just the general store and the small office beside it, but both buildings were complete losses. Exhausted, Florence was helping bandage a burn on a young man's arm when Jack found her. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke, but his relief at seeing her safe was palpable. "Everyone accounted for?" she asked. He nodded. "Minor injuries only, thank God, but Tom Jenkins lost everything in that store." "How did it start?" "Lamp oil spilled near the stove, from what they can tell." Jack ran a hand over his face. "Florence, about what I was saying before." She placed a finger gently against his lips. "Not here, not now. We're both exhausted." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers down her spine. "Tomorrow, then. I'll come to the Henderson place." But the next day brought complications. The town council called an emergency meeting to address the fire damage and determine how to help Tom Jenkins rebuild. As one of the larger property owners in the area, Jack's presence was required. Florence received a brief note explaining his absence and promising to come the following day. She tried to focus on preparing her lessons for the week ahead, but her mind kept returning to his unfinished declaration and her own unspoken feelings. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Henderson ranch. Florence was in her cottage grading papers when a knock came at her door. Opening it, she was surprised to find Beatrice Collins standing there, impeccably dressed despite the dusty ride from town. "Miss Collins," Florence greeted her cautiously, "this is unexpected." "May I come in?" Beatrice asked, her tone surprisingly civil. Florence stepped aside, curiosity overcoming her reservations. "Of course. Can I offer you tea?" "No, thank you. This won't take long." Beatrice remained standing, surveying the small cottage with barely concealed disdain. "I'll come straight to the point, Miss Jones. I know Jack Eastwood has developed an attachment to you." Florence felt her defenses rise. "I don't see how that's any of your concern." "It concerns me because I care about Jack's future," Beatrice replied smoothly, "and I've come to make you an offer." "An offer?" Florence repeated, incredulous. Beatrice opened her small handbag and removed an envelope. $1,000, cash, enough for you to establish yourself quite comfortably elsewhere. Florence stared at the envelope in shock. "You're trying to buy me off." "I'm trying to save you both from a mistake," Beatrice corrected. "Jack needs the loan my father can provide to secure his future. With it, he can become one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. Without it," she shrugged eloquently, "his little ranch will remain just that little." "And you think I'm standing in the way of this grand future?" "I know you are," Beatrice said bluntly. "My father won't approve the loan if Jack continues to entertain other attachments." Florence felt anger rising in her chest. "Jack is not a man to be manipulated, Miss Collins. Neither am I." "Don't be foolish," Beatrice snapped, her composed facade cracking. "What can you offer him? You're a schoolteacher with no family, no connections, no dowry. I can give him social standing, business opportunities, children who won't be born into poverty." The cruel words struck home, touching on Florence's deepest insecurities, but she refused to show it. "I think you should leave." "Take the money, Miss Jones," Beatrice urged, placing the envelope on the table. "If you truly care for Jack, you'll want what's best for him." After Beatrice left, Florence sat staring at the envelope for a long time, her thoughts in turmoil. Was Beatrice right? Would staying with her limit Jack's prospects? The double E meant everything to him. It was his life's work, his dream. What right did she have to stand in the way of its success? By morning, Florence had made a painful decision. She wrote 2 letters, one to Helen Henderson explaining her sudden departure and expressing gratitude for their kindness, and another to Jack. This second letter took hours to compose, her tears blurring the ink several times before she finally sealed it. She packed quickly, taking only what would fit in her traveling bag and leaving the rest. With the Henderson family attending church in town, she slipped away unnoticed, walking the 5 miles to Sierra Vista to catch the eastbound stagecoach. The town was still recovering from the fire, portions of Main Street blackened and damaged. Florence kept her head down, not wanting to encounter anyone who might delay her departure. At the stage office, she purchased a ticket to Tucson, from where she could connect to trains heading east. As she waited for the stage to arrive, Florence clutched her bag tightly, fighting the urge to abandon her plan and run back to the Henderson ranch back to Jack. But Beatrice's words echoed in her mind. What could she offer him compared to the future the Collins family could provide? The stagecoach rumbled into view, dust rising from the wheels as it pulled to a stop. Florence stood, her heart heavy as lead. This was for the best, she told herself. Jack deserved his chance at the success he'd worked so hard to achieve. Florence. The voice cut through the quiet Sunday morning like a thunderclap. She turned to see Jack riding hard down the street, his horse lathered with exertion. He pulled up sharply in front of the stage office, dismounting in one fluid motion. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his face flushed with anger and exertion. Florence stared at him in shock. "How did you? Helen found your letters when they returned from church," he explained tersely. "What is this about, Florence? Why are you running away?" The stagecoach driver called for passengers to board. Florence glanced at it, then back at Jack's confused, hurt expression. "You should read my letter," she said quietly. "I did. It made no sense." He pulled the crumpled paper from his pocket. "I cannot be the obstacle that prevents you from achieving your dreams." "What dreams? What obstacle?" Florence took a shaky breath. "Beatrice came to see me last night. She explained about the loan, about what her father requires." Understanding dawned in Jack's eyes, quickly replaced by fury. "And you believed her? You thought I'd choose land over you?" "It's not just land, Jack. It's your future, everything you've worked for." "Passengers boarding," the driver called impatiently. Jack stepped closer, taking Florence's hands. "The only future I want is one with you in it. Yes, I want to expand my ranch, but not at that price. Never at that price." Hope flickered in Florence's chest. "But," she said, "Beatrice Collins doesn't speak for me," Jack interrupted firmly. "And neither does her father. There are other banks, other ways to grow, but there's only one Florence Jones." Tears welled in Florence's eyes. "I was afraid of holding you back." Jack's expression softened. "The only thing holding me back right now is that you still haven't told me if you love me too." A laugh escaped through Florence's tears. "I do. I love you, Jack Eastwood, more than I thought possible." The stagecoach driver cleared his throat loudly. "Madam, are you coming or staying?" Florence looked up at Jack, whose eyes were alight with hope and promise. "I'm staying," she said, not taking her gaze from Jack's face. "Definitely staying." As the stagecoach pulled away without her, Jack drew Florence into his arms. "Don't ever try to leave for my own good again," he murmured against her hair. "Let me decide what's good for me. And that's you, Florence. It's always been you, from the moment you stood on that riverbank looking across." Their first kiss was sweet and tender, a promise sealed beneath the Arizona sun with the whole town potentially watching. Florence found she didn't care who saw this, felt right, felt true in a way nothing else in her life ever had. "What happens now?" she asked when they finally parted. Jack smiled, the expression lighting his entire face. "Now I take you home, and then, if you'll agree, we start planning our future together." The summer passed in a whirlwind of happiness. Florence continued teaching while Jack managed his ranch, but they spent every available moment together. True to his word, Jack found another source for his loan, a bank in Tucson that approved his expansion plans without matrimonial conditions. In August, on the exact spot where they had first met by the river, Jack asked Florence to be his wife. The bridge he had built stood solid and weathered behind them, a testament to obstacles overcome. "It won't always be easy," he warned as he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. "Ranch life has its hardships, but I promise to make your path as safe as I can for as long as I live." "I don't need ease," Florence replied, her heart full to bursting. "I just need you." They were married in October when the desert bloomed briefly after the late summer rains. The ceremony was held on the bridge itself, symbolizing their journey from separate lives to a shared future. The entire community attended, even Beatrice Collins, who had eventually offered stiff congratulations after her father's banking competitor had approved Jack's loan. Florence wore a simple cream dress with wildflowers in her hair. Jack couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him across the bridge that had brought them together. "Not afraid anymore," he whispered as she reached him. Florence smiled, taking his hands. "Not with you beside me." Their vows were spoken above the gentle flow of the river that had once separated them, now tamed and bridged by determination and love. As they were pronounced husband and wife, cheers erupted from both banks. That night, in the ranch house that was now their shared home, Jack carried Florence across the threshold with reverent tenderness. Their coming together as husband and wife was gentle yet passionate, a culmination of the love that had grown between them since that first meeting by the riverbank. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Jack traced the contours of her face with a calloused finger. "I never thought I'd find love again after Sarah," he confessed softly. "Never thought I'd want to." Florence kissed his palm. "Sometimes life gives us second chances we never expected, or weren't looking for," he agreed. "Like a stubborn Boston schoolteacher afraid to cross a river." She laughed softly. "Or a headstrong Arizona rancher determined to build a bridge in 3 days." As winter settled over Sierra Vista, the newlyweds established routines and traditions in their shared life. Florence continued teaching but moved her classroom to the Double E, converting a small outbuilding into a schoolhouse where children from surrounding ranches could attend. Jack expanded his herd as planned, the northern pastures now filled with healthy cattle promising prosperity for years to come. The bridge over the San Pedro River became known throughout the county as Eastwood Crossing, a reliable passage even during the spring floods. Jack maintained it diligently, adding reinforcements and improvements each year. Their first Christmas together brought a special gift: Florence's announcement that they would welcome a child in the summer. Jack's joy was boundless, though tempered with concern born from past tragedy. "I can't lose you," he confessed one night, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "You won't," Florence promised, covering his hand with hers. "We're stronger together, remember." As her pregnancy progressed, Jack became increasingly protective, insisting on accompanying her to and from the schoolhouse and hiring additional help for the ranch, so he could remain close to home. Florence endured his hovering with patient amusement, understanding the fears that drove his concern. In July 1874, almost exactly a year after they first met, Florence gave birth to a healthy son they named Joseph Robert Eastwood. Jack, who had paced anxiously outside during the delivery, wept unashamedly when the midwife placed the squalling infant in his arms. "He's perfect," he whispered, bringing the child to Florence's side. "Just like his mother." Florence gazed at their son, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "He has your chin," she observed, tracing the baby's tiny features with a gentle finger. "Poor fellow," Jack laughed, his eyes never leaving the miraculous new life they had created together. Little Joseph thrived, growing strong under the Arizona sun and the devoted care of his parents. Florence managed to balance motherhood with her teaching, often conducting lessons with the baby sleeping peacefully in a basket beside her desk. Jack proved to be a natural father, carrying the boy with him around the ranch from the time he could sit upright, pointing out cattle and horses, teaching him the ways of the land that would one day be his. In the spring of 1876, as the San Pedro River swelled once again with snowmelt and rain, Florence stood on the bridge Jack had built, watching the water flow beneath. Joseph, now a sturdy toddler, held tightly to her hand, his eyes wide as he watched the rushing current. "Scary water," he observed in his simple vocabulary. "Yes," Florence agreed, "but we're safe up here on the bridge Daddy built." Jack joined them, sweeping Joseph up onto his shoulders. "And this bridge will stand for generations," he promised, "for your children and their children after them." Florence leaned into his side, contentment washing over her. "I never imagined this life when I stood on that riverbank 3 years ago," she mused. "I was so afraid. And I never imagined how building a simple bridge would change everything," Jack replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "Best 3 days' work I ever did." As they walked back to the ranch house, the setting sun gilding the landscape in gold, Florence reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place, this life, this love. The river that had once represented her greatest fear now flowed peacefully through their land, crossed by a bridge that symbolized all they had overcome together. That night, after Joseph was tucked into bed, Jack pulled Florence into his arms on the porch swing, a nightly ritual they both cherished. "I have news," he said, his voice holding a note of excitement. "The railroad's coming through Sierra Vista next year. They're offering good prices for beef contracts." Florence smiled, knowing what this meant for their growing ranch. "That's wonderful, Jack. There's more," he continued. "They need someone to organize the local ranchers, coordinate shipments. They've asked me to take the position." Pride swelled in Florence's chest. They couldn't choose a better man. "It means more security for our future, for Joseph's future." His hand moved to rest over her abdomen, where their second child had just begun to make its presence known, and for this little one's. Florence covered his hand with hers, still amazed at how easily he sensed the changes in her body. She had only confirmed her suspicions with the doctor in town yesterday. "How did you know?" she asked. Jack smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've been humming in the mornings." "You only do that when you're expecting." Florence laughed softly. "You know me too well, Jack Eastwood." "Not well enough," he countered. "I plan to spend the rest of my life learning everything about you, Florence Jones Eastwood." As they sat together watching the stars emerge above the Arizona desert, Florence felt the perfect rightness of their life together. From fear to love, from separation to union, from the East Bank to the West, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. The bridge that Jack had built stood as a testament to his promise. "I'll make your path safe." And he had not just across the river but through life itself. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Helen, arrived in the winter of 1876, completing their family. As the years passed, the Double E Ranch prospered under Jack's wise management and Florence's support. Joseph grew into a thoughtful, responsible young man who shared his father's love for the land, while Elizabeth inherited Florence's passion for education and eventually took over the ranch school. The bridge over the San Pedro River remained standing through floods and drought, maintained first by Jack, then by Joseph, and finally by Joseph's sons. It became a landmark in Sierra Vista, known as the place where a brave schoolteacher had conquered her fears, and a determined rancher had built not just a crossing, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. And whenever anyone asked Florence about the bridge and its origin, she would smile and tell them the simple truth. I was afraid to cross the river, so my husband built a bridge and promised to make my path safe. And for 50 years, he kept that promise every single day.